Hi students, I wanted to just take some time to just kind of go over the study guide for Bartleby the Scrivener and to give you a little more information about Herman Melville, the author, and hope to help you have a little deeper understanding of the story. I know the story can be a little bit too yeah, challenging sometimes to kind of struggle with. So I'm hoping that you're not struggling with it, and or to, if you are, to give you perhaps a little more insight. So I thought I would start just with just kind of a little quick biography of Herman Melville. There is one in Literature and Its Writers. I have this one, sorry, from biography.com, and just to kind of go over some of the highlights. Herman Melville was born in New York City in 1819. He worked as a crew member on several vessels beginning in 1839. So he went to sea and he wrote several works about going to sea, including Taipei in 1846, Omu 1847, and his great work, which was that Moby Dick, and that's the one that he is likely most familiar with. Familiar that you are most familiar with, perhaps, is Moby Dick. And so that was all of that. He was very successful with his sea stories initially, but then his writing became less accepted as he kept trying to do different things, and he really wasn't known well by the time he died. All right, so again, he was born in New York City in 1819, and it says the family enjoyed a prosperous life for many years. His father was an importer and merchant, and but his then they started not doing so well. The business wasn't doing that well, and then his when his father died, things went got very difficult for them financially. So so with his he had a good early upbringing, and then he went to sea, and this was he says in the literature and his writers, they have a quote that the sea was both my Harvard and my Yale. So he wasn't able to formally go to college, and he felt like he really got an education by being at sea, and his writing about those sea experiences were really firsthand with that. So uh, and again, he was very successful with his initial sea stories. With Bartleby, the Scrivener, he was really trying to do something different, and the story was not understood well. It was published in a magazine initially, which was common then, but it was not understood by the readers. People were really perplexed by it, as people are perhaps still today. So he initially, as he was initially successful with his writing, then not. He did have a day job as a customs inspector in New York City. All right, and so he died in 1891, and so he did live a long, healthy life. Had a very very solid family, very happy marriage, and all of that. All right, but I wanted to touch on to give you just a brief background of him, and then also a little bit more insight into perhaps what was going on in the country at the time that could lead to that could have an effect on the story, and his and of course his perhaps connection as well. So just a little biography, and you can read more. Again, the biography in Literature and Its Writers is just fantastic. All right, so think of when the story was written, right? So if you, sorry, peekaboo, I'm over here. So if you think about when the story was written, about 1850, what was going on in the country at that time? I'm going to pause and let you think about 1850 in the United States. So, have you thought about that? Okay, so the country was on the brink of civil war during that time, largely over slavery, and so this was really going on at the time with a lot of back and forth. If you remember, like the Missouri Compromise at the time, which was really a compromise for no one. that was making no one happy, I guess you could say. Some states were being admitted to the Union as slave states, others would be admitted as free states. And there was just, a great deal of conflict on this issue. So that was going on. So we were on the brink of war, really, at this time. And then, meanwhile, there was a little group of folks in Massachusetts known as the Transcendentalists. And so, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or know anything about them, but just to give you a little bit about the Transcendentalists. So, these folks were tended to be educators and intellectuals and folks like that, that were had these ideas, and they I'm going to skip down here. I have a little, if you can see, and I really hope you can see it, but if not, I'm going to wrestle with this a little bit to bring this up to show you these some of the major transcendentalists here. Ralph Waldo Emerson, if you look at his essay Self-Reliance, that's a famous work of his that really touches on a lot of the tenets of transcendentalism. Here, I'm going to try to wrestle with my little papers here. Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden, we might have heard of Walden Pond, right? That's Henry David Thoreau. And one that might not be so well known to you now, but was a huge transcendentalist at the time, Bronson Alcott. And so you might say, that name Alcott sounds a little familiar perhaps. So his daughter is really well known. Her name is Louisa May Alcott, who wrote the novel Little Women, which has never gone out of print since it was written in the 19th century. So her father was a real big transcendentalist. So there were more of them. These were some of the key folks here. And so what were they all about? Well, they're this group that had these beliefs that they believed in the individual. They believed that everyone should really be able to listen to their individual calling and just be their own unique selves, and just be themselves. And they believed that if everyone were able to do that, to be an individual, then society would basically work for everyone. They did not believe the opposite, that if you just did what was best for society as a whole, that would also work well for individuals. No, they really prioritized. They had a real belief in individuality. And if you look at Emerson's essay Self-Reliance, he really delves into that. He was known as the father of transcendentalism, Ralph Waldo Emerson. So there's that. So at any rate, and they really believed that you had to go for your, live out your ideas, your beliefs, be your unique self, right? So individuality was huge with the transcendentalists. Very, very big deal to them. All right, so then also the other tenets of transcendentalism, they very much believed in the importance of nature, and in that people could experience the divine through nature. And so at this point in time, our society began, because of their transcendentalists, to have a shift from nature being really scary, and nature being something that needed our protection. So, for example, if you look at some works by Nathaniel Hawthorne, such as Young Goodman Brown, the forest, going into the forest is seen as scary. There's a lot of imagery of evil happening in the forest and that sort of thing. And it was kind of like our country was vast and unexplored, and that it was kind of scary to folks, maybe there's wild animals out there, or anything could happen to you out in the wild, right? But then when you really see some of this expressed in Walden by Thoreau, where we start shifting into needing to protect nature, that nature needs our protection, that people can experience God through nature. And so this was a big, important issue for them. All right. Then they were very progressive and ahead of their time in that they were very anti-slavery. So slavery was going on at the time. So they were abolitionist. Some of them were active, many of them were active in the Underground Railroad, getting slaves to um, freedom. So they were very, very anti-slavery. In fact, Henry David Thoreau refused to pay his taxes, because federal taxes, because part of his federal taxes would go to, is in his reasoning, to support slavery. And he was adamantly opposed to this. So he did go to jail for that, for refusing to pay his taxes. It wasn't hardcore prison. It was like a local jail, but still, that's how seriously he took it. Bronson Alcott, who started a uh, community, an intentional vegan, actually, there's more about that coming up, community called Fruitlands. It was a transcendentalist community. He, with that community, no one would wear cotton because cotton was manufactured by slave labor. And so they would not wear that, although it was very difficult to have other, we didn't have any kind of, a lot of the fibers that we have today, they didn't have. So it was difficult. It was a sacrifice. But that's how committed they were to. They really did a lot, for the abolitionist movement. They were also very much in favor of women having rights. Remember, women did not have the right to vote at that time, so that was something that was important to all of them. So also vegetarianism was really getting started, it was going, people had vegetarian ideas before this. I don't mean to say that it didn't exist before, it did, but that it was really took on kind of it got, I'm going to just go back to it got started in this country in a big way during this time period in the 1850s, and by a couple different folks in, various circles, not just the transcendentalists, but there was a big interest in it, in among the transcendentalists. Bronson Alcott was vegetarian. In fact, he was really vegan, but there was not that term vegan was not really coined until the 1940s, but he called himself a strict vegetarian. So that, and the idea was because of the desire to protect animals, to help animals, that sort of thing. So that was another issue that they were interested in. And the other thing, I'm going to just flippity-doo-dah over here. The other thing was that they also believed that humans were basically good. They did not really believe in the presence of evil. They believed that humans were basically good, and when people did bad things, that they were just not in their right self, so to speak. And so they were kind of losing their connection there with God. That was something that they thought. And that, so Melville, why do I bring up the Transcendentalists? Well, this was going on at the time in the country, right? This was a movement at the time. Melville was well aware of the Transcendentalists. In fact, he was somewhat associated with them. He knew them, he knew them. They'd have conversations, that sort of thing. But he ultimately rejected transcendentalism, as he was not actually a transcendentalist. He was just very aware of them and, agreed with some of their ideas, but ultimately it didn't work for him in some ways. He did end up actually believing, for example, in that there is a presence of evil. And so, there were just he didn't find it to be a practical sort of working way to live out all these tenets. So but it was going on in the country at the time. So it was, I'm going to try to make this stand up here. Okay, my little easel is falling. Okay, easel, stay. Okay, major easel problems here. So